Why did Adolf Hitler's mother try to kill him? Why did Hitler's father beat him with shoes? And what major theft did Adolf Hitler commit during his childhood at school? To find out all this, watch the full video. The young man stood beneath the grey sky of post-war Vienna, his clothes tattered, eyes wild, clutching a sketchpad that no one cared to look at. Rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts, abandoned by the dreams of becoming an artist, and caught in the political wreckage of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Adolf Hitler drifted through a broken Europe, one gasping from the trauma of World War I. But the canvas of war would prove more enduring than any painting. Germany, 1918. The war was lost. Soldiers limped home to shattered cities and empty bellies. The once proud Kaiser had fled. And from the embers of defeat rose a fragile thing, the Weimar Republic, a democracy born in disgrace, tasked with governing a nation burdened by the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty carved into Germany's pride. It demanded reparations, stripped away territory, and imposed humiliation. Germans didn't just lose a war, they lost their identity. And Adolf Hitler, now a corporal in the defeated German army, watched the chaos unfold. In the beer halls of Munich, amid cheap cigarettes and nationalist fury, he discovered something that would change the world: his voice. From nobody to nationalist. In the early 1920s, Germany's streets were battlegrounds. Communists, monarchists, nationalists, and liberals clashed violently. Amid this turmoil, the German Workers' Party, a small, radical group, caught Hitler's attention. He joined, and quickly transformed it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. But Hitler didn't rise by policy. He rose by performance. Crowds gathered not for solutions but for spectacle. Hitler's speeches were thunderous, emotional, hypnotic. He blamed the treaty. He blamed the Jews. He blamed the communists. Every national wound had a villain, and every villain had to be destroyed. In 1923, he attempted to overthrow the Bavarian government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. It failed. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but only served 9 months. Behind bars, Hitler dictated his manifesto to Rudolf Hess, a book called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. It was a chilling prophecy, blending nationalism, racism, and anti-Semitism into a blueprint for power. The path to power. By the time Hitler left prison in 1924, the economy had improved slightly, and the Nazis had lost momentum. But the quiet would not last. In 1929, the Great Depression devastated Germany. Unemployment soared. Hunger returned. Democracy faltered. Hitler saw his chance. Through the late 1920s and early 1930s, the Nazis rebranded. The swastika became a symbol. The brown shirts, SA, patrolled the streets, silencing opposition with fists and clubs. And most crucially, the Nazis promised a return to greatness, to national unity, economic revival, and revenge against those who had stabbed Germany in the back. It worked. In the 1932 elections, the Nazi Party became the largest in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. But they still lacked a majority. The political elite, hoping to use Hitler's popularity while controlling him, made a fateful decision. On January 30, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. The door to dictatorship had opened, turning democracy against itself. Hitler wasted no time. Just 4 weeks after becoming Chancellor, the Reichstag building was set on fire. A Dutch communist was arrested, but the Nazis exploited the incident masterfully. They claimed it was a sign of a communist revolution. The public, terrified, allowed Hitler to pass the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties and granting the state power to arrest anyone without trial. The real goal: total control. In March 1933, Hitler introduced the Enabling Act, which gave him power to enact laws without Reichstag approval, effectively turning his chancellorship into a dictatorship. The act passed. Democracy, still wearing its old clothes, died quietly in the night. Now came the cleansing. The Nazis banned opposition parties. Trade unions were dissolved. Newspapers were censored. And soon, the first concentration camps were established, not yet for Jews, but for political enemies. Dachau, near Munich, opened in 1933 as a model for many more to come. Propaganda and power. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Hitler appointed Joseph Goebbels as Minister of Propaganda. Radio became a weapon. Children were indoctrinated through schools and the Hitler Youth. Films, posters, parades, all echoed the same message. Germany had risen again, and only the Führer could lead it. The Nazis redefined reality. Books were burned. Science was rewritten. Art was sterilized. And the press was no longer a check on power. It became a trumpet for it. By 1934, Hitler was unchallenged. But one threat remained: the SA, the brown-shirt paramilitary force that had helped him rise. Its leader, Ernst Röhm, had ambitions of his own. In June 1934, Hitler struck. In a purge known as the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler ordered the assassination of Röhm and other rivals. The SS, now under Heinrich Himmler, became the supreme force of terror. The army, which feared Röhm, pledged loyalty to Hitler. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the roles of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer, leader of the German Reich. Germany was no longer a republic. It was a one-man empire. The stage is set. By the mid-1930s, Hitler began openly violating the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt the military. He reoccupied the Rhineland. The League of Nations protested, but did nothing. The world was weary of war. Hitler interpreted inaction as weakness. His hatred of Jews became national policy. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and outlawed marriage between Jews and Aryans. Anti-Semitism, once whispered, was now law. Factories roared. Highways spread. Germany's economy surged under rearmament. The people cheered. The scars of Versailles seemed to fade. But war was coming. Not by accident, by design. Hitler believed in Lebensraum, living space, for the Aryan race. That meant conquest, to the east, toward Poland, Russia, and beyond. By 1938, Hitler had annexed Austria in the Anschluss, without firing a shot. Then came the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia, handed over by the British and French in a desperate attempt to avoid war, a policy known as appeasement. But Hitler was never seeking peace. He was preparing for the greatest war the world had ever known. The first shot was not just the start of war, it was the end of peace for an entire generation. The chill of dawn settled over the Polish countryside on September 1, 1939, as thunder rolled across the sky, not from storms, but from Luftwaffe bombers. Below, tanks rumbled across fields, and German troops advanced with ruthless precision. Hitler had launched Operation Fall Weiss, the invasion of Poland, and with it, he had ignited World War II. Hitler stood in the Reich Chancellery, eyes fixed on a map. He wasn't interested in Poland's culture, people, or cities. He wanted space. He wanted power. He wanted Lebensraum. Germany had signed a non-aggression pact with its ideological enemy, the Soviet Union, in August 1939, known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The secret clause: Poland would be divided between Hitler and Stalin. So, while German troops attacked from the west, Soviet forces invaded from the east on September 17. Poland was crushed in less than 4 weeks. 2 days after the German invasion, Britain and France declared war, a war they weren't ready to fight. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. Hitler's generals had perfected a new way of waging war: blitzkrieg, lightning war. It wasn't just brute force, it was shock and speed. Bombers hit first, destroying communication lines and infrastructure. Tanks and motorized infantry followed, striking deep into enemy territory. Traditional defensive lines crumbled. In April 1940, Hitler unleashed this fury on Denmark and Norway. Both fell quickly. Denmark surrendered in a single day. Then came the West. On May 10, 1940, Hitler invaded France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The Allies expected an attack through Belgium, so Hitler went through the Ardennes forest, terrain they thought impassable for tanks. He proved them wrong. The French army, considered one of the strongest in Europe, collapsed in 6 weeks. By June, Hitler stood triumphant in Paris. The Maginot Line, France's mighty defense, had been bypassed entirely. German flags flew over the Eiffel Tower, and France signed an armistice in the same railway car where Germany had surrendered in World War I. It was Hitler's moment of personal revenge. Only Britain remains. With most of Western Europe under Nazi control, Hitler turned his eyes across the English Channel. But Britain, under Winston Churchill, refused to surrender. In July 1940, Hitler launched the Battle of Britain, the first major military campaign fought entirely by air. The Luftwaffe targeted RAF airfields, then turned to cities in the Blitz, bombing London night after night. But the British held firm. Radar technology, brave RAF pilots, and Hitler's strategic errors turned the tide. By October, Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. Britain had survived, and Hitler had tasted his first setback. The war expands, North Africa and the Balkans. In the meantime, Hitler expanded his reach through alliances and intimidation. He forged the tripartite pact with Italy and Japan, creating the Axis powers. In North Africa, German General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, supported Italy's failing campaign. Rommel pushed British forces back with daring maneuvers, but supply issues and Allied resistance would eventually wear him down. In the Balkans, Hitler invaded Yugoslavia and Greece in 1941 after they resisted Axis control. Victory was quick, but it delayed a critical plan, a plan that would become Hitler's greatest mistake. Operation Barbarossa. Hitler betrays Stalin. On June 22, 1941, in a stunning act of betrayal, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history. 3 million German troops invaded the Soviet Union. Hitler believed the Slavs were racially inferior and that the Soviet regime would collapse under pressure. At first, he was right. German forces pushed deep into Soviet territory, capturing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Cities like Kiev, Smolensk, and Kharkov fell. Soviet losses were staggering. But the Soviet Union was vast, and so was its resilience. By October, the Germans reached the outskirts of Moscow. Victory seemed within reach. But then came the Russian winter, merciless and unrelenting. Hitler had refused to equip his troops for winter, expecting a swift victory. The snow-choked supply lines. Engines froze. Soldiers died by the thousands. The Soviets, under Joseph Stalin, regrouped. In December 1941, they launched a fierce counterattack and pushed the Germans back from Moscow. Operation Barbarossa had failed to deliver a knockout blow. Worse, it had opened a two-front war, the very situation that had doomed Germany in World War I. The Holocaust begins. As Hitler expanded his empire, he also escalated his racial war. Jews, Roma, the disabled, and other so-called undesirables were rounded up and sent to ghettos and labor camps. The invasion of the Soviet Union brought even more brutal policies. Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, followed the army and executed civilians en masse, men, women, children. By 1941, the Nazi leadership moved toward the final solution, a plan to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. Death camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor were constructed for industrial-scale murder. Trains filled with families departed from cities all across Europe. Most would never return. Pearl Harbor and a global war. On December 7, 1941, Japan, Germany's ally, attacked Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii, crippling the Pacific Fleet. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. And then, in a move that sealed the fate of the Axis, Hitler declared war on the United States. Now, Hitler was at war with the three greatest powers on Earth, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the United States. His war machine was stretched thin, and the world was uniting against him. A shifting tide. By the end of 1942, cracks had begun to show. In North Africa, Allied forces under General Montgomery defeated Rommel at El Alamein, marking the beginning of the end for Axis control there. In the Soviet Union, the city of Stalingrad became a brutal battleground. Hitler ordered his troops to capture it at all costs. Stalin ordered his men to defend it to the last man. The result was one of the bloodiest battles in human history. The Reich that promised 1,000 years began to crumble in its 12th. It was the winter of 1942. Inside the Führerbunker, beneath the streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler studied maps that no longer made sense. His armies were scattered, his allies faltering, and his dream of a German empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals was bleeding out in snow and fire. But Hitler refused to see it. In his mind, defeat was betrayal, not reality. And that delusion would drag millions to their deaths before the end came. Stalingrad, the turning point. The city of Stalingrad, grey, industrial, and sitting along the Volga River, became the graveyard of Hitler's eastern ambitions. In August 1942, Hitler launched an offensive to seize the city, partly for strategy, but also for symbolism. Stalin's name was on it. Hitler wanted to crush Soviet morale. The battle turned into a living nightmare. Street by street, building by building, soldiers fought with bayonets, bricks, and bare hands. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Supplies ran out. Corpses piled in the rubble. Still, Hitler refused to let the Sixth Army retreat. By February 1943, 300,000 German troops had been surrounded and were either dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. Stalingrad wasn't just a loss, it was a message. The Wehrmacht could be defeated. Cracks in the Axis. Meanwhile, across the world, the tide had turned. In North Africa, the combined Allied forces pushed Rommel's Afrika Korps back through Tunisia. In May 1943, the Axis surrendered North Africa. Then came the invasion of Italy. In July 1943, Allied troops landed in Sicily, and within weeks, Benito Mussolini was overthrown. Italy surrendered. Germany occupied the north, and a puppet regime tried to hold power, but the southern front had opened. Hitler was now fighting on three fronts: the Soviet East, the Italian South, and the Western Front he knew was coming. Still, he clung to his belief in destiny. In his speeches, he blamed traitors, Jews, generals, weather, anything but himself. The final solution accelerates. Even as the war turned against him, Hitler intensified the genocide. By 1943, the Nazis had constructed 6 main extermination camps. At Auschwitz, trains arrived daily. Those unfit for labor were gassed within hours. Children, the elderly, pregnant women, none were spared. Inside the camps, SS doctors performed inhuman experiments. Prisoners starved. Bodies were burned in industrial crematoria. By war's end, 6 million Jews would be murdered. But Hitler spoke of this as a necessary cleansing. In meetings, he referred to it coldly, the final solution to the Jewish question. While Berlin burned, the Holocaust continued. Resistance and rebellion. Not all Germans remained loyal. Inside the army, a small group of officers saw the truth: Hitler was leading Germany to ruin. In July 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb in Hitler's briefing room at the Wolf's Lair. The bomb exploded. Hitler survived, barely. He suffered minor injuries but used the attempt to purge hundreds, including many respected military leaders. Rommel, the Desert Fox, was forced to commit suicide. From that day forward, paranoia consumed him. He trusted no one. His inner circle shrank. His decisions became more erratic. The man who once commanded a continent now hid behind concrete walls, trembling hands, and dreams of impossible victory. D-Day and the collapse of the West. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, D-Day. More than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. The Germans had expected an invasion, but Hitler had miscalculated the location. He believed the main attack would come at Pas de Calais. By the time he released reinforcements, it was too late. Within weeks, Allied forces broke through German defenses. Paris was liberated in August 1944. City after city fell. From the west, American, British, and Canadian forces surged forward. From the east, Soviet armies, hardened by the brutal war in Russia, began a relentless march toward Berlin. The Reich was collapsing. The Battle of the Bulge, last desperate gamble. In December 1944, Hitler launched a surprise counterattack through the Ardennes forest, hoping to split Allied forces and recapture Antwerp. It was his last major offensive in the West. At first, it worked. Fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft. German tanks rolled through Belgian villages. American troops were surrounded in Bastogne. But the fog lifted. The Allies pushed back. The Battle of the Bulge ended in failure. The Germans lost men, tanks, and fuel they could not replace. The war was now a countdown. The end in sight. By early 1945, Soviet troops had reached the Oder River, just 60 kilometers from Berlin. In the west, Allied forces crossed the Rhine and raced through Germany. American bombers turned cities like Dresden into infernos. German civilians, once confident in Hitler's promises, now fled burning towns or huddled in ruins. Inside the bunker, Hitler refused to leave Berlin. His health was failing. His hands trembled. He shuffled as he walked. He raged at generals who no longer existed and issued orders to armies that had been wiped out. But still, he believed miracles would come. The fall of Berlin. In April 1945, the Battle of Berlin began. Soviet artillery pounded the capital day and night. German soldiers, many just teenagers or elderly men, fought with desperation. The SS executed anyone suspected of defeatism. Entire city blocks became battlegrounds. Inside the bunker, Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, joined him. On April 29, they were married in a brief, bleak ceremony. The next day, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Their bodies were burned, as Hitler had ordered, to avoid capture. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda chief, followed suit, poisoning his 6 children before taking his own life. Surrender and reckoning. On May 7, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The war in Europe was over. In its wake, the world stood in ruins. Over 70 million people were dead, military and civilian. Entire cities were flattened. The Holocaust had exposed the depth of human cruelty. Millions of refugees wandered across a broken continent. At the Nuremberg trials, surviving Nazi leaders were brought to justice. Some showed remorse. Most did not. The world bore witness to documents, photographs, and testimonies that revealed the full scope of Nazi atrocities. Never again, the world vowed. Epilogue. Lessons in ashes. Adolf Hitler rose on the wings of fear, hate, and propaganda. He promised greatness and delivered destruction. He exploited democracy to destroy it, scapegoated minorities, and built an empire on cruelty. His war killed millions. His ideology poisoned generations. World War II was not just a war of nations, it was a war of ideals. Freedom versus tyranny. Truth versus propaganda. Humanity versus hate. The cost was immense. But the lessons remain.